it's okay. Mhm. No, it's fine. Good morning, colleagues. I guess you had a wonderful sleep and you are ready for the new day and ready to engage on the issues that are on the table. Yesterday we indeed have spent more time engaging and issues around decolonization emerged in a much stronger way. And we have seen that this is a project of the Global South, that which we are taking serious. And however, with the topics that we have handled yesterday, you could see that this is the battle for the souls of our countries, of our continents, and the battle against our very existence as a people, our humanity, our dignity is seriously under assault. And it's about the battle for our languages, cultures, our knowledges, and practices. It is about the imagination of the alternative solutions to the many challenges that we are facing in the global south. In the spheres of socio-political, economic, and religious sphere, as we have heard with what is now happening in Palestine. As we interact with diverse and complex histories, we find courage and strength to soldier on through our prophetic resistance, our poems, our arts, our rich languages, and of course, our continued efforts to recenter the indigenous knowledge systems and practices in our interaction and engagement with our mountains, our rivers, our oceans, and our storytelling heritage as a central method that we utilize in knowledge generation. Our traditional healthcare knowledge practices have given us hope. We are now using our redeeming memories to interface with epistemic injustices, health, ecological, and socio-economic, political, and religious challenges that we still are facing today. Ours must be a journey where we continue with what one called prophetic imagination, but also prophetic presence, prophetic resilience, prophetic innovation, and witness. So with these words, I would like to usher the Executive Dean of the College of Human Sciences at UNISA, Professor Zerish Zetunkosi, to come and do the welcome. I will not venture into reading her bio again because it has already been shared with you.
Thank you, Prof. Mashau. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, it's my third Hey, I don't know whether the colleagues are abusing me or it's payback time or it's what. But colleagues, what I can say, but they supported that when I come here 3 times, there is some support. So thank you very much. Welcome everyone to our 3rd day, our last day of the conference, our 4th International Conference of Indigenous Knowledge, Systems and Practices. They wrote here that to say, my name is Prof. Ngosi, then I'm the Executive Dean of the College of Human Science. I'm from KZN. I just want to emphasize the importance of languages. I'm Zulu, so I need to introduce myself in isiZulu. Igama lami nginguSolwasi Zethu Nkosi, ngiqhamuka le eKZN kwaMashu. Ngehle imifula nemifudlana, ngizalwa kwaNkosi uMasikhakhane noBaba Nkosi. I hope you got it. I just want to share the difference when you introduce yourself in isiZulu and if you introduce it in English, the business language. You say it with love. You know, when I tell people I'm from KwaMashu, then it evokes those emotions where I come from. So I enjoy my isiZulu, and I can have a little bit of other languages because the mother tongue language is the most important one. Yes. They always say in isiZulu, ulingcela ebeleni, which means it's a mother tongue sucked from your breasts. And also, we are saying implementation of the language policy because we want to emphasize the generation of this knowledge using our mother tongue. So let us continue and embrace our languages so that they don't disappear. Yeah. It's the final day of the conference, ladies and gentlemen, and then we have seen over these last 2 days how various knowledge systems are having an impact on the very knowledge creation enterprise on which the academy is premised. We have also seen how indigenous knowledge are not being promoted properly, how they're being created in disciplinary silos, and how they're being destroyed altogether. We've also seen how knowledge making is an always becoming collaborative process. All attendees have contributed in wonderfully moving ways to this dialogue. When I was checking the program, I find something so fascinating to the conference organizers. Our themes were paired. I don't know whether you noticed that. We started with mourning and dreaming. When we mourn, we know it's related to that. When we dream, it's something that God created. We don't understand it. Some lucky people, they will realize in the morning that my dream was ABC, but some of us, we don't remember. It's something that we do when we're sleeping. Then we went to resilience and survival. You know, you will survive because you are resilient. And also, in order for us to fight the struggles of this world, we need to be resilient. And then we've got religion and spirituality where other people, they put it in one box, but these are 2 separate concepts. When we talk of the religion and then spirituality, where we embrace our Africanism and also other types of spirituality. Then I was fortunate enough to go to the theme that talks about indigenous ways of cultural practices. In that room, I listened to how a PhD study was motivated by grandmother. You know, the way she engaged her granddaughter. But the presenter was not aware that she's sharing so much about what her grandmother did in terms of cultural practices, which brought in her PhD study on environmental sciences. And then we learned about the struggle from Rwanda, which happened 30 years ago. And as South Africans, we are also understanding of what is happening. Unfortunately, we missed the presentation on the othering of Gaza, but we understand about the happenings there, about the Israeli. This morning we woke up with Sudan, a CNN journalist were being captured by the Sudan and then they were released after 48 hours. And we understand the troubles and the challenges that are in the world. Then the next session is education and knowledge. These two concepts are interrelated. We need to generate knowledge so that we've got this quality education in our SDG 4. And then the next one was human and mature ecologies. We are here as human beings. We need to make sure that the ecologies that we are faced with are interacting with human and mature ecologies. Then there's a concept of health and well-being. We are in the sphere of social sciences. We understand the health concepts, whether you are a psychologist, you are a nurse, you are a social worker, you are an environmental hygienist, because health is the right. And the well-being of a human being is made up by circumstances around that person. Stress affects you as a human being. Then today we will look into decolonization, and we want to hear how can we as human beings around this room decolonize whatever that has been given to us. And then gender and sexuality is also, you know, there is that relationship, because the gender and sexuality, for us to understand that we are different human beings in this world. And then the resilience, which means the organizers wanted us to revisit, because it was dealt with yesterday as resilient and survival. Today we're saying resilience, revival, revitalization. I just wanted to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that this conference really, organizers took their time to look into the themes that are relevant to what we need to do as human beings. So when we move on, different presentation and dialogues have stretched the bounds of knowledge with arts, culture, performance, and visual offering. Different ways of knowing which exist alongside other linguistic epimestes. The IKSP serve as an important site for conference attendees to share their experiences in knowledge making as they relate to Indigenous knowledge system, including the publication platforms which are available, which need to be reformed, and which need to be created. The last sentence, it says the publication platforms which are available, which need to be reformed, because we understand the struggle that we are facing with. When you want to publish your Indigenous papers, it's either it does not fit to this journal or they don't understand. So this is an open call to say, let us create our own journals where we will engage this knowledge and then we'll share. There will be nobody who says, I don't understand what you are dealing with, because we understand what you are dealing with. And in today's program, the conference final keynote speaker will be delivered today is Professor Rosa Cordillera. I missed her. Where she's? Guten Tag, Prof. Guten Tag. Wie geht's? We are speaking now. Wie geht's? Yeah, no, we are welcoming her because I saw it's University of Bremen. I was fortunate to go to Hochschule Bremen. Yeah, they're good news. Professor Rosa Cordillera A. Castillo from German, University of Bremen. She will be presenting her talk titled Solidarity and Decolonial Ethics in Practice, Crafting Just and Liberatory Worlds. Prof. Castillo takes seriously the coloniality of knowledge and the effects that this has on all of us. It is through solidarity and ethics of care that Prof. Castillo begins to imagine beyond coloniality's violent grip. We look forward to listening, learning, and engaging with these insights and considering what they mean for our own context. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our last day to engage, so may we really be vigorous, share and make sure that we leave a mark to the organizers and the conference theme. In closing, we hope that the conference has offered people opportunities for reflection, witnessing and regenerative engagement. I would love to thank you very much to each of you for making this conference such a memorable and deeply educational experience. Onwards toward the preservation of the emboldening of Indigenous knowledge system. I thank you all. My DD is instructing me to stand here with my arms on the side.
Yes. There are some goodies that we need to hand over to you.
I need to declare colleagues.
So, please, those who
Okay, it's fine if they're not around. No,
they are, please come and do the honors.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Listen to Lisa. Evidence. Thank you.
Colleagues, our keynote has already been somehow introduced by the Executive Dean of the College of Human Sciences. I will just continue to read the brief bio, and of course not everything, so that then you can get a glimpse in terms of who she is. Professor Rosa Cordillera Castillo is a socio-cultural and public anthropologist, as well as a curator focused on social justice issues through interdisciplinary research, teaching, and both multimedia knowledge transfer and praxis. She completed her PhD at the Freie Universität Berlin and holds a plethora of positions. Prof. Castillo is the founder of and curator of the Philippine Studies Series Berlin, which is a platform with a focus on the Philippines, Filipina, and the diaspora for lectures, discussions, as well as art and film events. Prof. Castillo was previously a curator at the Haus der Kulturen de Veld. She was also an indigenous rights advocate for the NGO Anthropology Watch. Her recent publications include critical research, ethics as decolonial praxis, and the book chapters introducing that she has written, Introduction, Reframing and Reenacting Research and Collaboration and Regime-Made Disaster in Metro Manila, Beyond an Aesthetics, a reading of photographs of duet-struck war. I want to now invite Professor Castillo to the stage to share with us research. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Masham, Professor Nkosi, for setting the tone, and also for the kind introduction. And of course, thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this amazing conference, to be in your presence. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak with you today and for the inspiring exchanges and offerings over the last 2 days. It's such an honor to be here, and of course, also to be a keynote speaker alongside Professor Sekalo and Professor Id. So my reflections and practice on the topic of politics of knowledge is shaped by my positionality as a Filipina who has been based in Germany, as has already been mentioned, and working in German academia for the past 13 years, while maintaining scholarly and activist ties and collaborations to the Philippines, the country where I was born, raised, educated, and conscientized as an anthropologist, working on social justice issues together with concerned communities. Over the last 2 decades, such communities have involved or included Indigenous peoples fighting for their right to land, life, and environment, Muslims struggling for their right to self-determination, journalists, artists, and survivors resisting the brutal drug war killings of previous President Rodrigo Duterte, and Filipinos in the diaspora insisting on migrant rights and resisting racism. My trajectory as a scholar activist is deeply indebted to these thinker-doers, and to my mother, Fatima Alvarez Castillo, is one of the early advocates for social research ethics in the country and is a colleague of many of us here, as well as to decolonial scholars and activists, some of whom are here with us today, and I am particularly influenced by, of course, Professor Sidat and Professor Safla. They've all nourished and inspired me in my journey. So being at the interstices of the local and the nation state, the global and the diaspora, the global north and the global south, has opened up possibilities for me for solidarity and ways of knowing and engaging beyond the nation state, through which connections and disjunctures are felt and drawn between spaces, temporalities, and histories. My current professional location in German and European academia has in particular made it apparent to me in ways that were not as clearly personally felt while I was in the Philippines, the persistence of coloniality of knowledge production and everyday and structural forms of racism. And I'll share with you 2 specific instances. And next slide, please. So almost a year ago, I visited the visual research exhibition, The Many Wives of Mr. L, by Zina Niemeyer at a gallery in Bremen. So I guess you see, you see here a photo I took of the exhibition catalog. So the exhibition itself features photographs that this German visual researcher took of Filipinas and their American wives, because the exhibition features the single tours for men from the United States who go to the Philippines seeking wives facilitated by marriage agencies. So the exhibition featured these photographs, so very similar to this kind of photo that you see on the cover of the catalog, as well as letters from this Filipinas, some interviews. And my attention was drawn to this exhibit, which was traveling the country by Filipino and Filipino Germans who, along with Asian diasporic organizations and scholars in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, had written open letters criticizing the exhibition and the related feature in a German newspaper. Their critique centered on the exhibit being racist and sexist, for lacking context and dialogue with Filipino scholars and activists who have long worked on this issue, for reproducing white feminism, and for failing to offer a more nuanced account of this complex phenomenon and the violent systems of power in which it is embedded. One such open letter takes to task the exhibition and the news article for, and I quote, flattening the women into objects of desire. The intent of Niemeyer's project, the letter states, may have been to bring awareness to neo-colonial structures of patriarchy as claimed in the exhibition text, but the project is strongly problematic and disturbing because of the reproduction of the very same structure of violence within the project that it claims to call out. So being located for me as a scholar of color in the global north exposes me to a lot of these kinds of violence. And the other example is no less problematic. And this is a keynote lecture about the Philippine elections, but by a white male British political scientist during the European Southeast Asian Studies Conference held in Paris in 2022. This political scientist was given this prestigious platform despite of his lack of research in the Philippines. Based on a 3-week visit during the elections, he aimed to explain why the son of the dictator Ferdinand Marcos won in 2022, in the 2022 elections. Lacking any political, theoretical, or methodological insights, he instead showed the audience photos and videos of his trip. Can we go back to, okay, we can just, photos and videos of his trip, cracking one joke after another about electoral politics, campaigning, and violence in the country. There are numerous moments in his talk, but I'll highlight a few here. So at one point, while showing the photo of a voting center, which are held in elementary schools in the Philippines, he laughingly exclaimed, "Look at these chairs. They're so tiny, they look Lilliputian." So for those who are not familiar, the photo is already there. You will see it on the screen. So this is Lilliput. Can you maybe go back to the previous slide, please? Yeah. One more slide. Can you go back to the image right after this one, please? Yes, and let's stick to this, and I'll mention if we go to the next slide. Thank you. So in this image that you see, the story of Lilliput is actually the story of a giant being defeated by small people, right? But that was not what he meant when he said that the elementary school voting precincts look Lilliputian, because the chairs are so tiny, because it's an elementary school, and the people vote. I mean, the Filipinos know this. These are election precincts in the Philippines, and this is where people vote. So he retorted too that Filipinos do not vote in secret, as though people simply allow this to happen. In another part of the lecture, he showed a clip of an election campaign video of women dancing. But instead of analyzing the video, he merely showed it for laughs at the expense of Filipinos who are portrayed as driven by emotions and kinship ties, unthinking and lacking in agency or nuanced political subjectivities and history, thus rehashing old colonial and racist tropes in scholarship on Philippine politics. Whereas the speaker bragged about bravely going to a province that has a reputation for electoral violence, laughingly saying that somebody was even killed while he was there. The image of a swashbuckling colonialist going into chaotic, quote-unquote, uncivilized and quote-unquote barbaric places and surviving to tell the tale comes to mind. Now, one would think that people would walk out on such a speech. This is a massive Southeast Asian Studies Conference in an auditorium filled with majority white scholars. On the contrary, his jokes elicited much laughter from a significant portion of the scholarly audience. Tellingly, none of us Filipinos in the audience, nor colleagues who approached us afterwards in solidarity, were laughing. At the end of the talk, I and several Filipino scholars called out the speaker in the plenary for his Orientalist, simplistic, reductionist, and harmful portrayal not only of the elections, but also of the country and its people. We pointed out, too, that if the speaker genuinely wanted to understand why the son of the dictator won, he should have referred to works by Filipinos who have been working on this topic much longer and with more care and analytical insights than he. But he did not mention a single Filipino scholar. Better yet, the conference board and association should have instead invited the Filipino to give the keynote if this is the topic that they wanted to talk about. Next slide, please. This is not just an issue of representation or identity politics. It's also an instance of the white scholar, yet again, being given the platform and the power to speak about others without any form of accountability, despite harmful effects. So the lecture was an appalling display of Orientalism, of irresponsible and extractive and therefore unethical scholarship. And it is not an aberration. Previous slide, please. Yes, it's not an aberration. I can cite other experiences of myself, friends, and colleagues that show the pervasiveness of coloniality in academia. My work, for instance, has been denigrated by white scholars as patriotic and at the margins of international research. By implication, this means that my contributions to knowledge are only relevant to my country and have no broader theoretical, disciplinal, nor international significance. In contrast, if a white scholar speaks about the global South, it is often automatically seen as global or international or theoretical in its relevance. Scholars of color have also been tokenized in diversity and decolonial initiatives in white academia, inviting us to do the emotional and mental labor of talking about racism, coloniality, and decoloniality, yet permanent academic positions are denied to us as these are concentrated among white scholars. Next slide, please. So a study, this 2019 study in Germany, for instance, cited in an article on African knowledge production in Germany, which I encourage you also to read how Germans are writing about the African continent. They estimate that out of 49,000 full professors, only 15 to 20 individuals are Black, Indigenous, or person of color in Germany. And this doesn't include me because I don't have a permanent position. And if we raise issues on these topics, on these problems, we're often seen as disruptive. Next slide, please. In the book, Thinking with the South, Reframing Research Collaboration Amid the Colonial Imperatives and Challenges, we point out that too many contributions to knowledge, traditions of knowledge, and individuals producing knowledge from marginalized regions in the Global South and from minoritarian and diasporic context locations, both in the North and the South, continue to be underappreciated in global scholarly, artistic, activist, and journalistic conversations. Again, just thinking about Gazan journalists at the moment, especially Gazan journalists based in the North who are currently being tagged as terrorists by the Israeli state, which is, of course, licensed to kill these journalists. So contributions of Global South knowledge makers to theory building and emancipatory practices are largely sidelined and barely circulate internationally, though things are slowly beginning to change in the Global North. I mean, I emphasize that because if we decenter the North, we see that there have always been multiple centers of knowledge making that do not take the Global North as a frame of reference. And this conference is one of these examples of these kinds of knowledge-making, centers of knowledge-making. So what transpired during the keynote lecture, and please, next slide, please, is a continuation of epistemic violence and epistemic injustice through harmful and dehumanizing representations, as well as erasure and disregard for non-Western epistemologies, knowledge makers, agency, and history. It's not merely that it takes up space that should be given to Southern knowledge makers, it also reinforces global inequalities in knowledge production that strengthen Eurocentric, specifically white and male, power and knowledge. And the thing is, we see such epistemic violence and injustice committed as well on research conducted in Global South communities that are detrimental to their welfare, that are rooted in their demonization by those in power, including by those who themselves have been colonized. And I'll share two more stories here. A project that my mother, University of the Philippines Professor Fatima Castillo, and I were both involved with was the San Hudia biopiracy case here in South Africa. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this case. So we wrote about it in relation to informed consent and anti-mining struggles of indigenous peoples in the Philippines. So as many of you here know, Hudia is a cactus in the Kalahari Desert that San peoples have used for thousands of years to stave off long periods of hunger and thirst whenever they go on hunting expeditions in the desert. That it can suppress appetite made it a potentially valuable ingredient in the weight loss industry of the West. The South African Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, or CSIR, patented a substance in it to develop weight loss drugs and subsequently sold the rights to a UK, United Kingdom pharmaceutical company, which eventually sold the rights to a United States firm. But the CSIR did this without the free and prior informed consent of the San communities, without whose knowledge the weight loss property of the drug would not have been known in the first place. So the San communities put up a legal fight, but one response from the firm's executives, according to a cultural survival report, was disbelief that, quote-unquote, Bushmen still existed in South Africa. I mean, I highlight also this example because the knowledge that we gain from our work with communities can really be misused if we don't take care of this and if we don't discuss in clear terms how this knowledge is going to be used together with the communities with whom we've done our research. And I'll go into detail into this ethics in a while. But so despite this, the San communities won the legal battle and eventually reached a benefit sharing agreement with the CSIR, which means that benefits from the drugs from the Hudia plant, so whatever is developed from the Hudia plant, must be shared with the San communities for their development and must reach the poorest of their communities. So let me give another example. So related to this is another research I conducted on the role of Filipino anthropologists and students of anthropology in social impact assessments of mining projects in the Philippines. It was the years 2004 to 2008. So yes, I've been around for quite a while. I started learning anthropology in 1999 and have been teaching for over 20 years. So it was the years 2004 to 2008, and I was teaching anthropology at the University of the Philippines, while at the same time working on Indigenous peoples' issues such as land rights, particularly those projects that Indigenous peoples and activists critically refer to as development aggression. This includes mega dams and large-scale mining, often owned by multinational companies, that cause not only environmental damage, let's give them some time to... Are you okay? Yes? Okay. All right, so this includes mega dams and large-scale mining, often owned by multinational companies, that cause not only environmental damage, but also the displacement of communities, the destruction of livelihood sources, and human rights violations committed against communities and their advocates who oppose these projects. So during these years, several Indigenous interlocutors had expressed to me their disgust and mistrust of anthropologists who either misrepresented them, took information from them without consent, or provided a mining company with information that could be used to push a mining project in Indigenous lands. Social scientists, particularly anthropologists, were often hired by mining companies to conduct social impact assessments, especially in Indigenous communities. A favorable impact assessment is one of the requirements a project needs to gain government clearance to operate in a critical environment, which are oftentimes in Indigenous lands. There is thus interest in the mining firm to have a favorable assessment. So in the research that I conducted on this practice, where I interviewed anthropology students who were hired by one of their professors to work on an impact assessment project. One of them told me that, and I quote, "Since anthropology is the expert when it comes to Indigenous people's issues, our presence in the project was deemed crucial to its success." So they collected data on the potential social impact of the project, as well as baseline data on the community. However, they've also been asked to draw up strategies to convince people to favor the mining company or the mining project. Another anthropology graduate said, "Our main task is to outline a strategy where we can convince people that the project is good for them so that we can secure their consent." In other words, the assessment is not done by independent researchers. Instead, in this case, anthropologists who would conduct the assessment work in a context rife with conflicts of interest, resistance from many communities, and shortcomings in the laws that put Indigenous communities opposed to mining at a gross disadvantage. So needless to say, this practice is riddled with unethicality. They've been conducted in the guise of academic research, even though the study was financed by the mining company. Therefore, the study was introduced to communities as an academic research. The objectives of the research were not explained properly to the researcher by the hiring party. Therefore, the researcher couldn't also divulge the objectives properly to the community. The researcher lacks ownership over the data gathered and the freedom to write about the study for publication. And furthermore, the researcher signs a confidentiality clause with the company that restricts them from divulging data they collected, even if this would have been helpful to the community in making a decision on the entry of the project. And the researcher was also even more worse. The researcher is not allowed to divulge that first it was the mining company that financed the project, and that also if there are any information that they received that would have helped the community make a decision on the entry of the mining project, they were not allowed to divulge this, especially those views against the project that community members held. So what these cases show is that in certain corners of academia and in the applied sphere of academia, the importance of confronting the embeddedness of knowledge production in imperial, colonial, and heteropatriarchal ideologies, practices, and histories, and its complicities with oppression has yet to take root. More than 2 decades since Maori scholar Linda Tuhiwai-Smith, and next slide please, argued in her seminal book that academic research is neither an innocent nor distant exercise. Next slide please. I actually don't know who to look to. But in its entanglement with European imperial and colonial projects had in fact become one of the dirtiest words in the Indigenous world's vocabulary. Research is shaped by and is complicit in Western colonialism that has left its lasting legacies In the division of the world's population into degrees of being human, in this global racial ethnic hierarchy, some bodies are in the zone of being who are accorded the civil and human rights, while others are relegated to the zone of non-being, who are regarded as subhuman and are thus administered through war and oppression, as Frantz Fanon had long ago written. This categorization of peoples, which undergirds the coloniality of power, continues to structure contemporary racial, gender, and class stratifications, as well as informs the violence and oppression inflicted on certain bodies and populations. As feminist, indigenous, libertarian, post, and decolonial scholars have long asserted, research has stakes and researchers have multiple accountabilities for the knowledge we produce. Research, in other words, is simultaneously an epistemological, political, and ethical endeavor. So I thus advocate for research ethics that is oriented towards a rehumanizing, redistributive, and relational praxis. Ethics that I take as also crucial in the practice of solidarity. So when I think about research ethics and solidarity, solidarity itself has a need to decolonize. And the ethical imperatives that we take on board in decoloniality are crucial in decolonizing our practice of solidarity. Such ethics is an integral part of decolonial praxis, which is the dynamic process of thought, action, reflection, action, aimed at rehumanizing the world, redistributing resources, and producing counter-knowledges and counter-praxis. It challenges and holds accountable Eurocentric, heteropatriarchal, and anthropocentric ways of being, doing, thinking, and relating in order to imagine and build alternative and liberatory worlds, presents, and futures for humans and more than humans. Decoloniality is constituted by a multiplicity of praxis emerging from various contexts within and outside academia over a long historical period rather than a single paradigm. On the whole, I understand decoloniality is committed to confronting and undoing the coloniality of power, of racism, heteropatriarchy, and Eurocentrism. As Maldonado Torres explains, next slide please, decoloniality consists of efforts at rehumanizing the world, to breaking the hierarchies of difference that dehumanize subjects and communities and that destroy nature, and to the production of counter-discourses, counter-knowledges, and counter-creative acts and counter-practices that seek to dismantle coloniality and to open up multiple other forms of being in the world. He adds that it is not so much about obtaining recognition from the normative subjects and structures, but about challenging the terms in which humanity is defined and recognition takes place. So changing the norms and terms of recognition means, among others, decentering Eurocentric knowing, being, and thinking, of revealing the illusion of the Western story as one among many and an option only, as Maisha Maureen Alma insists. So I was just also reminded of that when Professor Nicolsi talked about problems with international publishing and how we need to break from this monopoly of what we see at the moment as international publishing and insist on different ways of writing, of different ways of disseminating knowledge, and of different ways of publishing. And that's a very big task, obviously, but I think it also emerges from a decentering of Euro-Western dominance, right? So I acknowledge, however, that decoloniality itself has become the subject of much debate. It has been criticized, for instance, for appropriating indigenous struggles, epistemologies, and methodologies, for not reflecting on decolonial scholars and activists' own complicity with coloniality, and for ignoring settler colonialism and land dispossession. Eve Tak and Wayne Young, in particular, takes to task those who claim to fight for social justice and decoloniality, but do not address their own complicities in settler colonialism and indigenous land dispossession. They refer to this, and next slide please, as settler moves to innocence, which are, and I quote, strategies for positionings that attempt to relieve the settler of feelings of guilt or responsibility without giving up land or power or privilege, without having to change much at all. While these criticisms largely apply to context of settler colonialism, what they ultimately point to is the lack of commitment to and actual practice of undoing the multiple structures of colonialism, of the need for abolition and reparation, as Nelson Maldonado Torres insists, thus rendering decoloniality as a metaphor. Others lament that it has been emptied of its significance, appropriated by white scholars and those with proximity to whiteness, which includes scholars of color, who do not address structural issues of racism, exclusions, and silencing that preserve white privilege and power. Such has been the hype in recent years in the global north about decoloniality that Leon Mousavi speaks of a decolonial bandwagon of scholars, especially in the global north, who apply for grants and get positions in the name of decoloniality, but who do not consciously undo inequalities in their own practice and institutions, who commit theory looting from the South, or does not give recognition to the long traditions of decolonial work in the global South. With the rise of decolonial work within the global north also came a backlash. In Germany, post and decolonial work are recently accused of anti-Semitism by politicians and mainstream media, with scholars like Ashime Bembe defamed as anti-Semitic and cancelled, and repression intensifying against scholarship that are publicly spirited and social justice driven, especially those that are critical of the Israeli state and who advocate for Palestinian rights. Indeed, what we see unfolding in the unimaginable horrors in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon, and the repression mainly in the global north against criticisms of Israel, and the manufacturing of consent for such violence in mainstream Western media, is a colonial matrix of power laid bare for the world to witness to, and that demands an ethical response. Such backlash, however, I think, and I kind of argue this, is a testament to the gains of decolonial movements in highlighting structural and global inequalities in knowledge production, epistemologies, and ways of being and relating, and the rootedness of this in Eurocentrism. Moreover, these decolonial movements do this beyond critique, which is threatening to the status quo. So the backlash happens also because of this kind of gains. In that decolonial movements are actively proposing, developing, and experimenting with methods to dismantle practices and systems of dehumanization, and in envisioning and realizing a pluriversal world within and beyond academia. And I insist that such efforts deserve continuous engagements. And I'm coming from also a position where there's a lot of conversations I've been a part of where the people already say, I don't want to use the term decolonial anymore because it has already been so co-opted, it has already been emptied of its significance, it has been rendered a metaphor. But I think what we need to do is to continuously sharpen and evolve decolonial critique and methods instead of relinquishing them to the dustbin of knowledge production and political action. This is especially necessary since the gains of decoloniality are the results of decades of multiple strands of struggles in various parts of the world, not all of which, of course, refer to their work or movement as decolonial. I suggest that one of the central ways to move decolonial projects forward is through a critical form of research ethics oriented toward decolonial praxis, which, as I had mentioned, already also shape decolonial solidarity. So what I will share is definitely not an exhaustive list, and indeed numerous works serve as valuable guideposts and inspiration, including the work of the Institute for Social and Health Sciences. It was amazing for me to hear, especially the panel on community engagement yesterday, and to see this in practice, and of course the sharing over the last 2 days in this conference. Next slide, please. As my mother reminds us, and I quote her, decolonial scholarship has many sources of knowledge, methods, techniques, tools, wisdom, both subaltern and mainstream. We don't have to invent, mostly. Rich materials have been developed in feminist pedagogy, critical studies, indigenous studies, and by decolonial scholars. What is needed, perhaps, is more imagination, more praxis. The next slide shows Next slide, please. The next slide shows some of the works that have guided me and that I have used in my practice and teaching, and this is, of course, also not an exhaustive list. Decolonial ethics confront the practice of ethics within power relations between researcher and interlocutors, or rather, knowledge co-producers, and between scholars of the global north and the global south. South, or rather Souths in the plural, next slide please, refers not only to economically disadvantaged nation states, but also to spaces and people who have suffered due to capitalism, colonialism, and their manifestations. As a metaphorical concept rather than geographical, the South include those who have been marginalized, erased, and silenced in the North, and who resist this oppression. Decolonial ethics is also sensitive to and critical of structures of inequalities within post-colonies that have shaped research conduct and knowledge production about the Global South by Southern scholars themselves, by those with relative power and privilege in the web of multiple colonial and imperial relations within and in relation to the Global South, and those with hybrid positionalities such as those like me who are now based in the Global North. So this necessitates examining the embeddedness of our work, knowledge production and solidarity within longer histories of colonialism and imperialism, and the ethical implications of the coloniality of knowledge to seek ways to address these power relations. In locating knowledges, bodies, privileges, and practice within intersecting systems of oppression, decolonial ethics thus espouses an intersectional approach and critical reflexivity. So this involves the praxis of thought, action, reflection, action regarding one's positionality, place of enunciation, privileges and biases, as well as responsibilities and accountabilities during and after research. That is, in all acts of representation and engagement. And these are enacted not as a mere navel-gazing exercise, nor as a reinforcement of white innocence, as my colleague Anthony Patathu and his collaborators have pointed out, but rather to undo relations and structures of inequalities. What does that mean? I've seen also reflexivity becoming, writing about one's positionality and reflexivity becoming just a standard a thing that one has to do to tick the box. But it's actually done also to pat oneself in the back and say, I've done that. But I'm not going to do the work of actually undoing inequalities, right? And that feeds into the white innocence and those with proximity to whiteness, right? Next slide, please. At the same time, research ethics that positions itself as a decolonial endeavor challenges the ways in which dominant research ethics guidelines preserve the privilege and power of the researcher in making ethical decisions and in collecting data and bringing them elsewhere for analysis, which has already been pointed out, for instance, by Samoan anthropologist Lita Operesa and the Decoloniality Europe Collective. It is critical as well of the legal and bureaucratic orientation of the current dominant ethics guidelines that do not necessarily cultivate ethical consciousness and behavior. It's a tick-the-box legalistic process rather than a pedagogical praxis-oriented process. Such a critical ethical stance furthermore questions how ethics codes, such as the United States Belmont Report, valorize rationality and individuality, including in conceptualizing justice, which disregards the importance of community, of relationality, and of emotions in making ethical choices, as argued by my mother. So the alternative to this is a research ethics that centrally considers for whom, how, and why we're doing research. It is built on care and accountability and is grounded on relationality with humans and more than humans, that we see ourselves, as was already mentioned the past 2 days, in the sense of the Ubuntu. The sharing of knowledge and on the just and fair collaboration with communities we work with, and the thinking of ways of co-authorship and ownership. That's also another crucial thing I think that we need to push for, that we rethink authorship in the work that we're doing. That's why I saw one of the works that I showed there was by Richa Naga, who Salim yesterday mentioned also. In her book, Hungry Translation, she co-authored it as Richa Naga in Journey With. And then she puts the names of the community organizations that she had been doing research with. So decolonial ethics also reflects and works on the implications of the knowledge we produce and of our methods in dissemination. Next slide, please. Linda Tuhiwai Smith, for instance, urges researchers to ask ourselves, whose research is it? Who owns it? Whose interest does it serve? Who will benefit from it? Who has designed its questions and framed its scope? Who will carry it out? Who will write it up? How will its results be disseminated? And then she further adds things that will never be captured in standard ethics forms, right? Is her spirit clear? Does he have a good heart? What other baggage are they carrying? Are they useful to us? Can they fix up our generator? Can they actually do anything? While Begalit Chilisa, next slide please, challenges us to ask ourselves, whose side am I on? Do I challenge and resist dominant discourses that marginalize those who suffer oppression? Who am I writing about? Self or others, or both? What needs to be rewritten? Do the research own a description of themselves? Have the voices of the research been captured in a way that the research recognize themselves, know themselves, and would like others to know them? In a similar vein, the York University's Gen Urb website on feminist research offers further ways forward. They assert that the ethics to decolonize knowledge production and also solidarity involves first drawing attention to how coloniality shapes and operates through knowledge production, such as forms of epistemic violence, having respectful and non-extractive and exploitative relations between researchers and interlocutors, and between researchers from different parts of the world. Examining our citation practices, including critically reckoning with what counts as knowledge and who produces theory, such that we do not erase or marginalize knowledges and we avoid reproducing hierarchies of knowledge production. Finding and creating new ways of inclusive forms of processes of knowledge production, especially with those who have been historically erased. Looking into how the knowledge we produce and co-produce can connect our interlocutors' projects, such as those relating to self-determination and redressing inequalities, and being attentive to and drawing attention to new forms of imperialism as well as solidarities. I would like to also emphasize that some of the decolonial work that I've seen happening in parts of the global north, at least in the spheres that I'm familiar with, have reduced it to diversifying the curriculum. So how about we include a bit more people of color, Southern knowledge makers into the curriculum? That's a part of the process, but that doesn't end there, right? What matters also is how are this diversity of materials, of knowledge makers being engaged with? But also, and I mentioned this in the panel the other day, who gets to have a seat in the decision-making table? Who gets to have the positions? You know, it also refers to the hiring practices. It also refers to the publication practices. It also refers to the grant-giving practices. So it's all of this together, and it's just not the curriculum. But that's the easiest way, actually, to decolonize, because it's comfortable, even if it already causes a lot of discomfort in a lot of scholars. So in other words, decolonial ethics and solidarity means critically examining the power and privilege of the researcher and the solidarity worker to interpret and to theorize and to be the sole ethical decision maker, while reducing people we work with as mere sources of empirical data who are incapable of producing knowledge and theory themselves. This is a research ethics that recognizes on equal terms knowledge produced in the Global South and by other historical marginalized knowledge producers and knowledge archives, and strives for non-exploitative, non-extractive, and reciprocal knowledge production. As a process of thinking, acting, reflecting, acting, it calls for finding and developing ways of working alongside or with knowledge co-producers instead of speaking for or about them, of including in the research design a feedback process and dialogue with knowledge co-producers and marginalized knowledge makers and practitioners, of giving up space and dismantling privilege, of reflecting on and addressing our own complicities in coloniality, and of embracing the humility as well as discomfort that come with this process. So in closing, decolonial ethics in practice is inherently anti-racist and rooted in a deep commitment to social justice. It embodies solidarity while simultaneously shaping how solidarity is enacted. As my mother states, research ethics is or must be about justice, solidarity, caring, and empathy. Redirecting ethics in this way is essential for dismantling the coloniality of power, knowledge, and being that continues to influence research, academia, and solidarity work. This shift not only impacts the lives and communities of our knowledge co-producers, but also advances decolonial processes and movements, contributing to the creation, hopefully, of a more just and liberatory world. Thank you.
Now you can sit in the meantime. Yeah. Let's give Prof. Castillo another round of applause. If I were to summarize your paper in a sentence, you were saying no ethics without social justice and human solidarity. So Yeah. And of course, you would have reminded us that there is continued plunder of our knowledge systems. There's continued distortion of our knowledge systems. And in the main, they continue. Those with power continue to do research among us without us. And yeah, in so many ways, you're calling for justice. Let's see, and let's hear what Professor Azihangwisi Helen Mabandu Mudzusi is going to say. Professor Azihangwisi Mabandu Mudzusi is a professor at the University of South Africa, head of graduate studies at some point, and now a school director. And she has published widely. She has supervised PhD and master students to completion, and her research focuses on HIV/AIDS and gender and sexuality matters. Welcome to render a response to Prof. Castillo. Prof. Mabantu.
Ndi Macheloni. I'm going to follow what the dean did. The dean was saying, she said Zulu. Now, I want to show you who I am. So I'm a Muvenda woman from a royal family. People are starting to know, or I'm called Womakatsi, who is an aunt for the family, not for the family, but for the community. So that's how I position myself, so that when I respond, Professor Rosa will understand my origin. I'm from rural area where what you were talking about the global north coming to steal knowledge and everything, they do it to us where we are staying. So, Prof. Rosa Cordelia, when you initiated your talk about the exhibition, and I was lost somehow. Where's ethics coming? And because I didn't even know your position, it was like, where are we going? Where have I put myself into? But the moment I read further, I realized that you saw how issues of patriarchy is continuously portrayed in all the exhibitions, and also how women are just portrayed as objects of sex. So that's when I started to wake up. I say, okay, it means let me go further and listen so that I can respond. And I was so touched when you talk about how white or people from the north are given platform in the south as keynote speaker, as without even knowing the place, knowing the background, knowing what they're talking about. They'll just come and present. We clap hands. We even give standing ovation. We didn't do it for you, but we can still do it. Because you're like us. But they will clap, and after that, with our rating system, these people are A-rated scholars. They know the North, they know the South. Whereas they have fully misrepresented us. I was also touched when you talk about how the research which you have contributed in about the sun and the tree which is contributing to what is it? Lambing hunger, making sure that a person is not hungry. I need that one. Where that knowledge was taken by CSIR, and instead of using it in South Africa, because their council in South Africa, they sell it to the North. And when they sold it to the North, even if they are saying the Sun won the battle and they're benefiting peanuts, because they're getting a share of a share of a share of a share. Unlike if it was utilized in the South where it was discovered. And when we're talking about that, I saw the relevancy of that might have happened in the 90s, but what is currently happening now in this very province of Cape Town, what is happening in Mowbray, where the San people realize that have their space, their land, where they feel like this is what we call home, this is ours, but where Amazon have come and bought their land. At first, they were saying, you can't. But because money talks, few people were bribed and telling people how they will benefit, how they will get, the company will create 2,000 jobs. And that 2,000 jobs will mean that some will be cleaners, paid 3,000 or less than that. And people will say, yes, the company have done that. Because of what you brought, where you find that the researchers come being bought, and people will think they're coming to tell us about the real benefit, not talking about all the disadvantages which will happen. So when you brought that, I saw the reality of what is continuously happening, where people are exploited in the form of they will be developed. So I could relate with what you were talking about. And I was so happy when you brought about a false decolonizer or false decolonial scholars who will even apply for funding, and they are known to be decolonial scholars. But when it comes to decolonizing, they are doing nothing, but they are given millions of funds. And they even fight with real decolonial scholars who are doing good work. I remember when Prof. Sikalo, unfortunately, is out, starting to talk about we need to have our status, our position regarding the Palestine war, fight, and whatever. People were saying, it's not necessary. We can't do that. Some even withdraw. So when you brought that, I was just thinking, yes, we have a lot of false decolonial scholars who are even promoted and having grants, whereas they are not doing what they are supposed to be done. And when you change the tune and you come to real ethics, I started to like you most. Because that's where my new niche and direction is going, where I was talking about ethics in African rural context. Because when you brought the issues of co-ethics, where you were talking about relational ethics, which considers community, not the Western type of ethics, which consider individual, and even the justice is for individual, without checking how is whatever is said going to impact the community? How are other people are saying? What are other practices where sometimes what you think it's respect, it's disrespect to the community. But the moment you brought the issues of respecting community, respecting the relationship, I realized that yes, it's very, very important not to focus on individualistic ethics, which when you are respecting an individual, like I deal with issues of HIV and AIDS, which you find that it's not about one person. It's about the entire family. But people will be focused on that and even disclose the status, not knowing that that disclosure is not for the individual. They even give people money. If you say, I'm living openly with HIV, we will give you so much money. That person has parents who have not yet dealt with stigma and discrimination, has a child maybe who is going to be stigmatized. But because it's ethics of consent from informed consent to one person, they don't consider what is going to happen. So I'm so grateful that you and your mom are fighting for that relational ethics. And also, when you were talking about the community should also co-benefit from what is happening, which is really, really necessary, because one of my arguments in the ethics in African context is saying researchers are not journalists. We are not supposed to go there and extract information and go. We need to work with the community to assist them in finding contextual relevant solution, which will make them improve. And also, it's not a once-off work where you go, you do research and go. But it needs to be a cycle. We have done this. This is our implementation, and what is the output? So when you were talking about that, it also relates to a paper which I've just written on cyclical longitudinal ethnography, where you go, you evaluate with the community. So it means you cannot even go out and distort them, because you know you are within that with the community. So after saying that, I'm just saying your paper, your keynote speak was so relevant, Prof. Kodilera, and we're really grateful.
Thank you very much, Makazi. Thank you very much for once again lifting some of the nuggets when it comes to the paper that Prof. Castillo would have presented, issues of patriarchy, white male dominance in academic spaces, issues of continued plunder, not only of our knowledge systems, but our resources and land. You see, even with the wars that are taking place in Africa, we have more than 50 wars taking place at this point in time. But it's only Israel, Palestine that is lifted up more higher than the rest. Basically because the rest have to do with the plunder of our resources, like in the DRC and so on. So those ones will not be flagged because they speak to the resources that are much needed in the West. You have spoken about exploitation in the name of development. So people are exploited by given peanuts whilst they take everything. Those who have traveled the north, you would know that the minute you land, you realize, yeah, this is like heaven. Recently, I was in Budapest, and when we had a boat in the evening, and the beauty, and I was saying, yeah, now I understand Revelation 21, that indeed we are not going to heaven. God is coming down to join us here on earth. We must just renew this earth to become heavenly. Like the beauty that I've witnessed that evening, I was saying God will be mad if he will come and destroy this thing. There's no way that would be given creative powers and continue to innovate and make the world the best, and God just comes and destroys that. That will be a very foolish God, unfortunately. So with those words, the floor is open. Let's get 2 chairs for our keynote and then our respondent, so that then we can engage them. Prof, say that please. Can we have a roving mic? Let me take a few hands, 2, 3, and then you'll be number 2, this side, number 3. And please, when you ask your question, just introduce yourself and then move forward, step forward so that we can see you, Prof.
Morning. Mine is not a question. It's a comment and a reminder that Prof. Castillo's mother was a visiting professor at UNISA in 1996.
Yeah.
And she presented on relational ethics. Those of you who are long enough at UNISA will know that prior to 1996, UNISA did not have any ethics committees. And thanks to Prof. Castillo, Senior, UNISA established its first ethics committee when Prof. Maluleke was the director for research.
Yeah.
So we owe a great deal to Prof. Castillo's senior mother.
Wow.
She's listening online. So the struggle continues.
Yeah.
Hello, good morning. I'm Professor Dindo Cafe from the University of the Philippines, Manila. And I have affiliation with Dr. Castillo because he's a former professor in my department. Although she was there earlier than me, I came in just like early 2000. Congratulations, Dr. Castillo, for the very critical and exhaustive and comprehensive presentation on decolonialization. But I have some questions. First, I just want to problematize on your titles because the title is Solidarity and Decolonization, Decolonial Ethics in Practice. It means that there should be praxis, right? And so I'm like, for example, in ethics in the Philippines, it's the concept of ethics among IPs, indigenous peoples in the Philippines, is more than the ethics that we have. It's because for them, of course, we contextualize it in a more collective and communal society. And it's not only that, it's because it's also part of their cosmological belief. What I mean is that when they seek for consent, it's not the decision of individuals or human beings, but you have to consult the spirits. It's the spirits that would give you the consent. And you have to do the rituals. No? You have to offer pigs or you have to offer chickens. No? And then there is like, what do you call this, a shaman that would read the innards and then would tell you that, spiritually speaking, research cannot push through. It's because there are problems as we see it in the innards or in the intestines or specifically the liver part. No? Things like that. There are different rituals of IPs. No? But in that context, no, I'm actually questioning on, of course, if that is the case, it means that even ethics here is introduced from the Western, it's a Western concept introduced to local or indigenous people's perspective. No? And so with that, I'm asking on, or my query is more on, how can we attain solidarity in this sense? No, I think we need to problematize more on how we can attain solidarity and decolonial ethics. If in the first place, the term or the concept of ethics is borrowed from the Western perspective, it is introduced, and we are introducing this to the IPs. And I think we need to resolve this in that sense because there is a question that we are practicing ethics for what and for whom? I think that's a crucial question there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. You remind me of a conference that I recently attended. And when it came to questions and answers session, then the facilitator was quite irritated when people will take long to state their question. So he was saying, look, you must just be brief and to the point. And that's not how we think in the global south. Each time that we want to raise a question, we have to provide a context so that you understand where we're coming from. So much appreciation. Prof?
Thank you. My name is Hugo. I'm just appreciating your, Prof. Castillo, your citational practice of your mother. Of course, who was a professor, but we tend to evacuate our families or our mothers, our grandmothers from knowledge production because of the Western frame within which we're trained. And in some ways that we are using knowledges that they pass down to us and unethically, I think, evacuating them from that process of intergenerational knowledge transfer. And it's an indigenous practice, I think, to recognize one's mother, one's grandmother, and broader community, but family in particular, within which we're located very often. So just acknowledging and appreciating that. Thank you.
Right. We can hand over the mic to them so that they can respond.
Thank you so much. I didn't even know that. I know my mom was a visiting professor, but the only part that I recalled was the one that was more recent, and that I was able to visit Joburg and Cape Town at that time. She's actually watching us on the live stream, so she had just messaged me right after my talk, so hi, Mom. So thank you so much, Hugo, also for that comment. It's interesting also because I give this lecture also in the global north, right, in Germany. And after one lecture, one of the white anthropologists came up to me after and she said, "I really love exactly how you cited your mother, how you acknowledge the work, the influence of your mother, because it's just exactly like this, generally not seen in a favorable way in this context, right? But I can't not do that. I cannot think of any other way of doing this kind of work without acknowledging the work of my mother. And thank you so much for that comment, Professor Cafe. Very important point to raise. And I fully agree that maybe, again, we talked about language before with Professor Sigalo on the first day. We're really rethinking, this the language that we want to use, or the other ways in which we can, conceptualize things also in a linguistic way, right? So I'm totally up for rethinking the very term ethics with also the ways in which he had started, right, and the baggage around it, and the very important point that you brought in on ethics that's grounded on specific context, especially in this case, like a specific indigenous context. And I'd like to just share that, which to me is an important, very important part and parcel of ethical research, is to ground ethics also in the ethicality of the communities within which we work. And just like to share that one of the research projects that I did together with my mother was actually to go to different indigenous communities in the Philippines to research their experience on research in their communities. And that based on this research actually is to also ask them what to them is, good practices of research. What is justice? What is accountability? Who gets to make the decision? What are decision-making processes? So it's really grounding it in these practices and concepts in these communities that, again, are not actually recognized in mainstream ethical procedures, right? So there's no space for this. And it reminds me also of the conversation yesterday with the community engagement panel, where you do this work and it just takes so much more effort. It takes so much more time, it takes so much more resources, and that's not institutionally at the moment supported. So we do this on our own, effort, and on our own resources, on our own time. And just to say again that it's also not oftentimes rewarded or recognized. Who gets the positions? Those who do things in a quicker way, those who do things without thinking of these kinds of issues and, of processes and without as much care. And so it goes back again to what the university is, which was also raised in the last 2 days. What is it for, and how is it built, and towards what purposes? So, yeah.
Thank you. Based on that, attaining solidarity in ethics, when you were giving example of maybe first appeasing or calling the spirit, in the paper where I'm talking about ethics in African context, my argument is we need to make sure that we respect the community. If we arrive there, they need mouth opener or gate opener. You need to pay that. It should not be taken as a bribe, but as a respect to the community. And if maybe I had one of the students who was doing the study on traditional healers, and when she arrived there, they wanted her to blow the bones. And she came out and said, "Prof, they want me to blow the bones." I said, "Go for it. Blow those bones." And when she was blowing, the traditional healer said, "You are not heavy. Now I can continue discussing with you." So that's the relational ethics and ethics in community, where we ensure that we respect the community. And if they say you need to be accompanied by community elder to go and conduct the interview so that you will not be cheated, you allow that. You interview with the community elder seated there, because they already know that when researchers come, they come to steal. Thank you.
Yeah. Colleagues, let me take the last round. If any, this side, 1, 2, 3, gone. And then we have 2 hands that side. And then we'll close it there. At the back. Please just introduce yourself.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I'm Prof. Lekoko from Botswana. Mine is just a, you can hear me? Okay. I'm Prof. Lekoko from Botswana. Mine is just a comment, and especially relating to decolonizing the methods, research methods. It actually reminds me of a time during COVID-19 when we were given money to do a study entitled Whose Crisis is COVID-19? And we were told to go to those people whose voices haven't been heard in the media. So we went out, looked for sangomas, traditional doctors, the street, and so forth, so forth. So when we come back, it was done in 5 African countries. So when we came back, we had to report on the methods that we used to investigate. And one of the teams stood up and said, we used no method approach. And I'm just wondering, after listening to your discussion, was it really no method approach? Or was there an approach there? Does this actually signal the importance of, or no importance of standardizing the methods when we are actually exploring the indigenous knowledge systems? Thank you.
Morning. I'm Madime Jamagoro from Tombiselega College of Agriculture. I just want to applaud the 2 specialists. Yesterday when we were presenting, I wanted to address issues relating to one of the presenter presenting about Black Study. And I was just encouraging her that we need to, in terms of solidarity as it's outlined now, that we must make sure that we use African scholars in addressing our indigenous know hows and whys. The challenge is that we are using the foreign scholars who are distorting the information, our information basically. And the question that was raised yesterday pertaining to the horror method. In South Africa, we have got traditional councils, and whereby somebody who wants to engage in agriculture, in research, we really need to follow traditional protocols. And once you follow the traditional protocols, I think the work of Chilizi, the decolonizing approaches and the research methodology, indigenous research methodologies, if we embark on those, I think we will be able to assist our young scholars. And I really appreciate your presentations. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And then we will get the responses. And then I will give direction where to go from here.
I love our format. We were also together in the roundtable discussion on the first day, so this is a continuing conversation between Professor Asvi and I. Thank you so much for sharing that research on Botswana. Sounds like a very big project. And again, the question is it really no method? Maybe it becomes really a question of we need to think of a different vocabulary, right? To also really ground it on the flexibility, the necessary care, and maybe even slowness and messiness of research that we are doing. If we want to do it with care and with ethics, then it really has to accommodate these kinds of multiplicity of ways of doing, right? So again, maybe method as a term has also also needs to be replaced with something else that would capture much more this kind of, care and messiness and flexibility than it connotes, right, as a kind of standardized set of practices. And thank you so much for the comment. I teach with the book by Bagale Chilisa also was a way to introduce my students in Germany to these perspectives, and it's actually really an effective and powerful way for them to really critique the canon that they have been socialized and educated into. And I would say, as I said in the roundtable discussion on the other day with Professor Azwi, that I have been really inspired as well by the responses of my students who have been so open to these perspectives and who have been taking on this important approaches and reflecting on their own positionality in very generative ways. They've also actually worked with Professor Poleng Sikalo's work. So it's really been like a very generative exchange that I've had with students by introducing all of these perspectives and approaches.
Thank you very much for that. There's nothing called no method. No method is a method. The issue is how do you validate or not validate, how do you support what you have utilized and it becomes a method. I've broken several protocols in my studies. I remember a paper on, WhatsApp as a data collection method. And I said I've used reversed snowballing because instead of people to be referred to me, they like it was on LGBTIQ, on how do they want to be, the terms, they wanted that terms to be used, and just general WhatsApp as a data collection method when we are dealing with vulnerable population. Sometimes when people are vulnerable, they don't want to be known or to be in contact with the researcher. So what I did was I will contact Nana as a person I know. Then I gave her all the instruction related to research and ethical principle, and then I say she responds. After responding, she sent it to somebody who she know, identify. Then it goes that way, and even when it was coming back, it came back until it reached me via Nana, because that's the only person I'm in contact with. But I gave reasons why I've done that. So I'm saying as long as you can give reason of what you are doing, it becomes a method. And we need to work out of the box, because those boxes are made to make us replicate and also block us from flying high. So as an academic, go out of the box, fly out, and they criticize you. And that will be a method again. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I just was reminded as well, so friend and collaborator, Filipino scholar Claude Yambao, for instance, instead of referring to his research as fieldwork, he refers to it as field of engagement, because it's critical of the ways in which fieldwork has evolved, and his work really is engaged research, right? So rethinking fieldwork as field of engagement. So just maybe, rethinking all of this vocabulary that we've inherited in order to capture so much more the kind of practice that we are doing.
Thank you very much, Prof. Castillo, Prof. Azwi, for reminding us about communal ethics, which is relational, and reminding us that we need to write together with the people that we conduct research among, and ensure that at least they become co-publishers in the process. But you see, we are told that we cannot write without citing. we are told that when we cite, we need to cite classical sources. And we are told that when we cite and cite ourselves, we are plagiarizing. So these are some of the complexities that at least you guys are helping us to unpack moving forward. Continue to write and put that on the paper so that then we can also start to have references to cite. Thank you very much. Oh, Professor.
I forgot something. Issues of writing with the community. This brings issues of challenging, incentivizing of research. Because when we're supposed to list all the community contributors, we'll feel that, okay, the university is not going to benefit anything, I'm not going to benefit anything. So, meaning that we need to challenge this incentivizing, which is individualistic, and focus mostly on the impact and also roping in other contributor and growing, like your term, Prof, where you say when you rise, you lift. But the incentivizing make us to say, if I lift, I will lose. So I better rise alone. Which I think we need to challenge this type of incentivizing where the focus is on sole authorship, whereas the research is done with a mass.
Yeah, rather take the money generated back to the community to assist with issues of development and so on. So, and that will be a better solution. I'm told that it's now time to take a peek. And I'm told that I should also join the two of you on the stage to take a peek with you because you are celebrities. And after that, I'm told that there are people who will join us on the stage to hand over the gifts. And then from there, we'll go directly to the pool no? Okay.
I have to earn my name on the spot.
Oh. No, it's fine then. Somebody had whispered something, so it's fine. I look like a giant here.
Thank you. So, Prof. Michelle, sorry, just as in the tradition of RKSP this year, we'd like to hand over a little gift for you as well.
Thank you.
Don't need a suitcase.
So sorry, people. Just before we break for tea, Nicholas is just going to come up and do some housekeeping, and then we can break for tea. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I feel I must apologize for the banality of housekeeping after all these exciting talks. The most urgent one, I think, is for those presenting after lunch in what will be venue 1 here, which is the decolonization session, to please give your slides now, if possible, to Norma Gugu or Tiffany. Norma's here. Where's Tiffany? Okay, yeah. So either Norma or Tiffany, right away, because the tech team needs it. So that's the most urgent thing to please do. Then less urgent but still important things. at 1 o'clock when we not 1 at 12:30 when we all go for lunch, please take your bags so they can make the rooms into the venues. What else is there? There'll be a photograph near the pool after tea, just after tea now. And then we'll head to venue 3. Right after tea.
Maybe we can do it now, the photo. Before the tea.
Oh, okay. So we'll do the tea, photo, and then head into that room for the next thing. And then 2 other things. Again, like yesterday, please speak to the people at the front desk about payment if that's still something that needs to be sought out. And for those that need CPD points for the lecture that took place on Tuesday evening, we will show a PR code at the closing. So just speak to any of us if that is a problem for anyone. And I think that is it. Oh, last thing. There will for the community site visit for people that are still interested in that's taking place tomorrow. Please speak to myself or Gawa, about that. Thank you. And if you are in venue 1 and you don't have slides, please let me know that.